This is the Nomad Futurist podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabil. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your host, Nabil Mahmood from Kona, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Philip Koblenz from Montclair, New Jersey.
And this is Nichol Bradford, the guest from San Francisco, California.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. So we've got all corners of the United States pretty much covered today. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what do you do?
Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Nichol Bradford. And what I do that might be the most interesting for you is that I founded a nonprofit organization called the Transformative Technology Lab. And what we do is we exist around a radical idea. Well, it was radical at the time when I started. Now I think it's found its moment, that all of the technology that we use for our outer world actually has a use for supporting our inner world. It has a use to help us with mental and emotional health and well-being. It has a use to help us with social and emotional wellness. And it has a use to help us with establishing, human purpose and performance. And we think about it really differently than many people, which we'll probably talk about in the rest of this call. But it's saying that tech shouldn't just be for, the bottom two layers of Maslow's hierarchy, the externals, that it actually has a role in, the inner world. And, I'm just going to say it at the start, because that's the moment where everyone compares what I'm talking to the technology that exists, which most of it and much of it is not great. Especially if you're talking about attention economy, social networks. And so this is not that. And so that is the lead that I'll start with.
All right. Well, that's great. And we'll get a little bit more into it as we move along. So just for our listeners, so that they understand who you are and what your background is. So you are a board trustee at the California Institute of Integral Studies. You're an adjunct professor at Stanford. Prior to that, you were at Singularity University, and you're also the CEO and founder of Willow Group. Am I missing something? I mean, I think you were with Blizzard Entertainment as the director of operations, and
I was
some gaming experience in Disney before that.
Yeah, I'm also a novelist and a martial artist.
Oh my God! All right, so I'm gonna try not to offend you.
And I can garden.
You are so well rounded. You're basically your own planet. It's incredible.
I'm basically my own planet.
Let me ask you this. I mean, this is your experience is it's incredibly broad and incredibly relevant. But right now you're doing something in transformative technology. What led you here? Like, how did you get to the point where this is, what your current purpose is, and how did, maybe you could talk about your early career in education and how you got to the point where, this is where you found your purpose.
Okay, great. So I was after I went to business school, I went to Wharton in Philadelphia with you. And after that, I actually went into the video game business. And I did that because I was interested in the next evolution in human storytelling, and because I wanted to be the marketing lead on the holodeck. Like, I wanted to launch the holodeck. I grew up in Texas in the 80s as a little Black girl. And, if anything that a little Black girl in Texas in the 80s would be interested in would be Star Trek, where you actually had a future where mankind, for the most part, had decided that they were on the same team. And, diversity was celebrated. And so, with that, in business school, like many people, I tried on banking and I tried on consulting, and none of it actually really felt right on my soul. And so one day I went do you remember that Barnes and Noble at Rittenhouse Square?
I do.
Phil?
Yeah. I mean, that was the one, but then before, like now you go to the campus and there's like, the Penn bookstore is basically a Barnes and Noble. But back then, that was where you went for, a real bookstore.
Yeah. So I walked into that and I picked up What Color Is Your Parachute? And I did it like my hair was on fire or like I had 150 G's of loans.
Both of which could have easily been the case. Right.
Both the same, right? And I sort of said, what is the thing that is worth having instead of approaching it like, how do you pay the bill? It was really, because I'm a middle-class kid, it's like my parents weren't going to pay for that for me. It was like, how do you justify having a bill like that? What could be worth it? What could be so, inspiring that it would be worth it? And so, I went and did What Color Is Your Parachute? And the words that came out of it were really about human storytelling, technology, future cities, human evolution. And I knew I wasn't interested in deep tech like routers and switchers, which I'm really like dating myself because that's what it was back then. And for entertainment, I enjoyed film and music, but I wasn't personally passionate about it. And so, I would take these words and I would go to the bookstore, the business school library, and I would enter them in and see what came out. And one day the annual report for electronic arts came out. And they'd had the forward-looking statements about, what they were hoping to create. And this was also the generation of really big games, and it's just like, as soon as I read it.
You were using metadata before metadata was a thing, keywords and whatnot. My God, you invented SEO.
Apparently. And so then I did a bunch of things, but ultimately I got into the video game industry and I started at Disney Interactive. Then I went from that to Vivendi Games. And then from Vivendi Games, I went to Blizzard in China. So I worked in China for 6 years and I was the head of operations, and I operated World of Warcraft China, StarCraft China. I also did go to market. So I'm one of the few people who has run the front end and back end of a massively multiplayer online game. And so I was doing that and I loved it. But, I also personally was sort of, I was, it's a longer separate story, but, the loneliness epidemic, I was experiencing it. You can be incredibly popular and social, and still be a lonely person. And so that was certainly true of me. And so, I started meditating also because I thought all the time. And, it's like many like type A high achievers, I spent a great deal of time in my head back then. And that led me to casually try a meditation retreat. And I did it with all of the seriousness of sandwiching it with a trip to Bhutan and getting Patty certified in Thailand. Like that's how seriously I took it.
You don't go into these things a little bit. You didn't just dip your toe in. You basically became a shaman.
I'm all in. I'm always all in. But I went there and I went to one in southern Japan, about 2 hours outside of Kyoto, and I had an incredibly profound experience. But the main thing that I felt was deeply connected to everyone, and so that was, maybe a more spiritual aspect of it. But personally, the really pragmatic outcomes was that one of the things that meditation does is it really reduces what's called rumination. And so rumination is the inner chatter that, it's like that bad roommate that lives in your head and tells you what's going to go wrong.
Everyone's got a Debbie Downer. Downer.
Everybody's got that. But, actually, if you meditate a bunch, Debbie Downer gets very quiet. And so that happened for me in kind of a dramatic and unexpected way in 10 days. Actually, I didn't hear Debbie Downer for about 4 months. Many people think that thinking has a sound. It actually doesn't. So if you hear yourself think, you're really just vocalizing. You can actually do everything that you do without hearing the sound of your voice in your head. So anyway, that happened to me. And because of that, when Debbie Downer isn't speaking, one, you're not afraid. And when humans are not afraid, they're actually, the natural state is happy. And so, in 10 days, I was, unafraid, incredibly happy, and I felt deeply connected.
So the opposite of happiness is not sad. The opposite of happiness is fear.
I would say yes.
We've all learned something already.
Yeah, I would say yes. The natural state of the mind is actually happy when it's not pushing or pulling. I mean, that's some that's some deep Buddhist theology there. But
I can only imagine when this comes out, we're blowing our listeners' mind.
I believe you're very fortunate to be able to do that at the time that you did. Some of us actually had to face the far edge of it, where we flatlined and experienced a 4 minutes, 19 second darkness. So,
ooh, okay. You have to tell me more about that.
Well, this is not my piece over here, but
it's relevant. Share. Go.
Yeah, I think I went through the same cycle as you did, but I flatlined, chased the corporate America culture, lost the voice, and I was just a part of the equation. And I flatlined. I had 2 heart attacks. I was dead for 4 minutes, 19 seconds, came out of it, packed my bag, left California, moved to Hawaii. I learned it the hard way. So I feel, you are way, way, way ahead of me. So kudos to you for being able to embrace your voice.
Kudos to you for not flatlining.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So as it entails to the transformative tech, what are some of the cool things that you're working or engaged in?
Well, so what happened with that experience is that on the other side of it, because I had a really positive association with technology, being on the back end of WOW, you see families and couples and communities, you see 15-year-olds running 5,000 person guilds, it's like people looking at games from the outside in, especially if they don't play, they don't really understand how social they are. They don't understand that, if a group of teenagers are sitting together and they're all looking at their phones, most of the time they're digital foraging. They're basically doing the exact same thing we did on the Serengeti, except they're doing it through the digital space. We just don't really, we have really horrible interfaces. Technology, I would say it isn't so much that, technology is bad. And when people say that, they're really talking about attention economy, social networks for the most part. It's that it's not actually that good. Like it's not good enough yet. And when it gets really good, then, I think it becomes a lot more interesting. But so anyway, I walked out of the retreat and I was like, this was 2015. Actually, it was 2014. And I had the acute realization that, even if most people, when they think about a meditation retreat, especially if it's a free one, they think, oh, meditation is free. But the thing is that to go on a retreat is an elite experience, because if you are a person who has the ability to not work for 10 days, you are an elite person, no matter what, because the bulk of the world works and they do it every single day. And so, the thought was like, how do we make these sorts of things? Like I had this life-changing experience. I had this experience where I became, where I saw life in a totally different way in myself. And, and it was because I had the fortune to have, 10 days off. And I had the friends, I had the network, that it didn't seem insurmountable because I had known someone who had actually gone to that same retreat. So the world is filled with a requirement that you have, resources, and that you have to be in the right networks to find the really good stuff. And, the most basic definition of technology is that it takes what is scarce and makes it abundant. And so my thinking on the other side of that retreat is like, how do we take the good stuff about human growth and development, about how we come to learn how to feel, be, and become, and we make it not, the stuff of Montessori schools, and elite opportunities. And we make it actually something that is just available in the floor of, what is available to everyone. And that is the role that technology has. And so what I'm working on, what I do is I work with founders and researchers and innovators and investors too, to really just catalyze the category where people are saying, we can really push into this inner layer. And so I was crazy in 2014, crazy in 2015, crazy in 2016. 2017, I got a little interesting. When people started to pay attention to Calm. 2018, I got a little bit more interesting as people started to pay attention to mental health and realized that the wellness gap and the services gap and the therapist and psychiatrist and psychologist and child development gap between what is needed and what we have would take a couple of 100 years if you've stocked every school that gives out credentials to the gills to even meet today's need. And it's accelerating. So then I got a little interesting, to people. And then 2019 was when people started to really take mental health a lot more seriously. And then 2020 is when I became, not that this matters to me, but 2020 is when I became right. Telehealth, teleeducation, tele-everything. And so you've seen, the surge in funding into mental health startups and, and a bunch of other things. And, Calm is now $1 billion, $2 billion valuation company. And so, the thing is, though, is that, we have a lot of design principles, or I have a lot of design principles for my community, which is, nearly 10,000 people all over the world in our events. Pre-COVID had over 1,000 people come to them who are essentially builders who build this kind of tech. And that none of this is not like the goal is not to replace humans. Actually, the very best examples of these products are ones that have humans in the loop, where, the technology brings someone to a human, either live or virtually, to help them with an overall program. Because if there's anything about experiences like you or I have had, Nabil, is that, preparation and integration, revelation without integration is just something you forget. That's the person who has an extreme event that puts them in the hospital for smoking. And then a month later, they're smoking again.
Right.
Even though they swore they won it, they had a revelation, but no integration. And so technology is actually really great for that. And so I call it pearls and thread, where, the humans can be the pearls and the thread, gets us ready for the moment and helps us integrate afterwards. And so I can send you lots of links and examples of real products that people are using today, as well as some of the things that I'm excited about. That are coming, but that's essentially what I do is I catalyze the creation of these types of products, and also, help people to think about the things that don't exist yet. I would say the fundamental, and I'll stop here, the fundamental issue that we're experiencing in the world, if you sort of like take everything and distill it, is that all of our tech is on exponential curves and all of our crises are on exponential curves. But human growth and development is linear and analog, and you have to be privileged to get the really good stuff. And so technology has a role to play in to help make that more of a curve and less of a line, because the danger in the gap for our species is really that we have to catch up to, our abilities, and we have to catch up to our problems in order to solve them from a different place.
It's amazing. I'm going to say two things. One, clearly your trajectory, which, continues on a direct relationship through 2020, is continuing through 2021 as you've peaked because you've made it to the Nomad Futurist podcast. So it's continuing.
I totally have.
There's no question. There's no question. I think the second thing that is really, I think the idea of making your experience accessible to the masses is brilliant and thoughtful and meaningful in a way that it's impossible for us to even articulate. But I think when people right now think about technology, think about the all of their children on their devices all day, particularly through the pandemic, whether they're leveraging those devices as a replacement for childcare, just watching videos on YouTube or playing some of the games that you had a hand in designing, developing, operating. I know my kids are crazy about Minecraft and Roblox and all that. At least the older one, with the younger one not too far behind. I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old for those that care. I think in general, the view of parents largely is that the access to technology is detrimental. That they're spending so much time in front of a device that they're not, experiencing the social interaction in the same way or getting fresh air, and that there's potentially, as a consequence of the e-learning and just the being in front of a 2D screen for so many hours a day, is going to be, some type of, social and emotional lack of development that, previous generations, didn't necessarily experience. And I think at the same time that, we have found this pandemic has found us with the tools to be able to handle the disruption. It's also, forced us to leverage, to a potentially unhealthy regard, some of those same tools. So I don't really know what the question is. I'm just going to let you respond to that diatribe.
I totally know what the question is.
Thank you. Tell us. What is the question?
So, I'm gonna answer in sort of 4 little vignettes that together will, I think, answer the question. So the first part is, if you look back on human history, there actually isn't a golden age of where humans have been really decent to each other. Like, we don't actually have a golden age. We've had golden communities and we've had golden blocks and we've had some golden families, but we haven't had a golden age.
And we've had Switzerland.
Right. And it depends on how deeply you go into their, what they funded, what they didn't at different times. Like, everybody's got a naughty past.
No question.
And so we don't actually have a golden age of, and I'm an African-American woman. And so I don't have to actually look that far in history to find a period of time of humans being incredibly not decent with one another. So, so I think it's really important to say, yes, there are these occasions, but like, how do we think about, shaping the future that we actually really want for our families and for our kids? And the second thing I would say is that, I think that a lot of the technology today is actually really bad. It's really bad design. Like, flat screens are terrible. But, from a design principle example, I'm going to give you one specific product. There's a product that I love that's called Moxie, and it is a robot that helps with social emotional learning. And they are focused on children with issues, challenges, spectrum, kids on the spectrum. And as you know, there's multiple spectrums. Actually, it's not just one, but it's those kids. And so Moxie is filled with exercises for kids to do. They got three things really right with the design. One is that the technology itself is not it's not the mediation of life. And so what Moxie does is Moxie is packed with gold standard academic grade exercises that are supposed to help teach social emotional learning. And Moxie, for example, will ask you who your best friend is. And then when the child tells them, they'll send the child on a mission to ask that best friend questions. So it's all about getting you back out there with people. Some people, when they've heard that, they've said, well, I want to teach my child social emotional, versus having something else. And it's like, I know plenty of parents who have struggled with tutoring their kids during during the pandemic, not because of lack of interest, but because of the power dynamics between children and adults. It's kind of like, when you watch a man try to teach his wife to ski. So it's like it never goes well, right. Or vice versa. It's like there's
my mother was a piano teacher, and my mother-in-law is a piano teacher, and the only people they were unsuccessful in teaching piano were their own children.
Right. So parents need allies. So it's not sloughing off the responsibility. It's giving you another point. It's giving you an ally. And when they designed the robot, they wanted it to be an ally to parents. But the other thing, speaking to your point, that's really important is that the robot is only operational for 1 hour a day. And so, everybody talks about how the marshmallow test showing children who have impulse control and who can wait end up being more successful adults. But if you think about it, you've never actually heard, how do you teach a child to wait? And how do you really teach a child to wait in an on-demand world, where Amazon can deliver anything that day or the next day? And so this is beautiful. It's like, the child has to wait. And so that is great, but it also keeps them from binging. And then the third part that they really got right is, their security system, everything is stored locally. The only thing that goes back to the company or that the company has access to is the math, but nothing about the child specifically. And if parents lose the password, then the robot gets wiped and they get to explain to their child why, their little robot friend has no idea who they are. And so, so that's the beginning. That's the beginning of like getting the design principles in place. So the technology actually really serves us. So you're right. The stuff that, you've probably observed as a parent of your kids over the pandemic, you're absolutely right. But we have to make it better. The third thing I would say is really, I'll give you an example about, that I use in this case too. Because of what I've seen on the back end of video games, I actually believe that digital friendships can be as valuable as physical friendships. I believe that two people who are being completely real with each other online can have a better friendship than two people being totally fake with each other in person. Like we've all had that experience. So it's really about teaching people, how to create trust, share trust, teaching people how to have, the self-awareness and emotional self-regulation and self-esteem, really, to be willing to be vulnerable so you can digitally have a great, relationship. I know people who met in World of Warcraft and then got married afterwards, like that is not uncommon. And so, I think the bias that digital connections are not, are not as good as physical connections. I think that also doesn't, include a lot of other things about, how people can be with each other in the real world when they have unresolved issues inside of themselves.
I will say this. I think if a robot asked my son who his best friend was, he would say his iPad.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I agree with you on quite a few things. Like, the golden age never had, never will. As it entails to bad technology, I don't think any technology is bad. It's either the use of it, the deployment of it, or how it's being managed.
Maybe the interface. The interface,
right? So, for instance, everything is done with good intentions, but it gets in the wrong people's hand, or we have not grown into that technology to modify it to where we need it to be. Like, a good example, you said about flat screen. I went away from a flat screen monitor several years ago, and I've got this curved monitor now, and I can get more done. The bezel's in the middle, and I've got a bigger screen. So we've got to grow with it.
Yeah.
And we'll adapt to it. I think the biggest challenge that I have is the fact that people do not understand technology. They do not understand how it works, what it can do. And that's what's creating the divide between the parent and children. That's when iPads become the best friends, and we are missing that human element.
Don't judge me, Nabil. I can feel it.
Humanization of this is important. So we need to be able to mine and control the information that we share with the next generation. And that's really the premise of this podcast, is to create that level of awareness whereby people can at least find out what's right, what's wrong, what are the things that they should be looking at.
Yeah.
Having said that, I mean, I think, what's really striking about what you're doing, and being technologists, we don't really talk about it. We live in the grind of technology every day. We act as fixing issues. And the world that we are in today, it's really very much so of patch fixing. What are some of the initiatives that you're engaged in as it entails to the wellness of humankind and just a general positive outlook of what the next generation should be looking into?
Well, let's start with, do you agree with that premise? Do you agree with the premise that the fact that people don't understand technology is what causes that gap, and potentially, parents being skeptical of technology for good uses when their children are using them?
Well, so before that, I want to say there is one type of technology that I do think is inherently bad. I think attention economy economics are like inherently set up to bring out our lower natures. So
let's define that for our audience. What do you mean by that?
So attention economy is basically, it's things where, you are in, the platform or the product is in opposition to you. Its goal is to keep you there, no matter what it takes. And so then the algorithms put in front of you the things that are the most sensational to keep you there.
The social platforms would be an example, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, whatever the case might be, or even some games.
Well, yeah, but attention economy ones. And so those are the ones where it's like they're usually free, and they are observing your, they are doing whatever it takes to inspire anger, or basically
you're talking about Candy Crush, aren't you? You're talking about Candy Crush.
Just basically the high, often polarized. Like Facebook is a really great example of an attention economy product. And there's many others like it. And so that itself is like, it actually, it really brings out the worst. Now, one of the reasons why attention economy products work so well is because we aren't actually aware of our feelings. Like we aren't actually, tracking. We in our society, we don't actually teach people how to deal with, negative and positive emotions. We don't actually teach at scale how to deal with conflict. We don't teach that conflict can be the source of intimacy, or connection. And so people are so afraid all the time. And so, one of the things that happens, like when you meditate a lot, it's like, one of the things you see in some people is that, they become unmoved by, like you can feel an angry feeling without getting angry. And so if you have an angry feeling come up and you sort of just observe it, like you observe the weather, then a post that is designed to go in front of you because they've identified that you're this person and that person, and then this would get you riled up. And so you'll, get into an online screed with someone. It'll just go by you.
Not to bring a political aspect, but I mean, Donald Trump was actually a perfect example of that.
They did probably really well with Donald Trump. And so, so on one hand, you could say you could fight it by elevating the emotional capacity of everyone, or, it's their model. So I would just say that's the one that I think the attention economy economics will be the smoking of this generation. It's like, we'll look back on it and be like, oh, how did we let that happen?
Thanks, Zuckerberg. And now, what is it? 2 days ago, he was in front of Congress saying he's making an Instagram for kids, like specifically for kids that are going to be staring and looking as though kids aren't the ones using Instagram today, but specifically looking for likes and, getting crushed if they don't have a picture on there. That I'm not going to get into it, but you get the point.
So that was the only thing. But to your point, it's like, you're right. Many people don't know how to use technology. They don't think really broadly of it. It's like one of the things I often do when I'm on calls and people talk about technology being bad, and I sort of ask them specifically what they're talking about, they often end up talking about attention economy, social networks. And so one of the things I say is like, when you say technology, and this isn't you guys, because I know you're really, exactly what you're talking about. But many people, when they say technology, that's actually what they mean. But it's like, Phil, you and I wear glasses, 4,000 years ago, this was magic. So technology is all around us. Technology is simply humans making tools that do things for them. And so technology is not bad, but it can be used in lots of different ways. And so when we aren't specific, or when people aren't specific, not you, but other people, when they aren't specific that they're talking about attention economy, networks, then everything gets put into that. And that makes it that much harder to solve. And so the things that are good, that are really hopeful, that I'm really excited about. In the beginning, I talked about those 3 buckets. The first one is mental and emotional well-being. And for that, I look for products that are helping with stress, anxiety, garden variety depression, because real depression belongs in healthcare. Happiness and sleep, because if you can't sleep, you can't be well. And that category is where you see the bulk of the products. Where I'm really looking for products, where I'm really excited about things, are things that are helping with social wellness, social and emotional well-being, emotional self-regulation. I'm really interested in products in that category. Like I was talking to a founder the other day who actually is building like it's sort of like a creator product, and it blends fashion, and it's really cool. But what we talked about her doing is naming her filters as emotions. So right now, if you look on your phone, the filters are things like patina, and their descriptions of colors. Right. But if you have, and they're focusing on young people. But if you have, let's just say you have a purple, green, and different colors, and you name them as colors, then you equip people to, how do I feel while I'm making this creator thing? I'm feeling sad, so I'm going to put the sad color on. And then that actually shows everyone. And you start to create a lingua franca, like a language of people. Because the very first step to becoming emotionally fluent is to know that you have emotions and to be able to identify which ones they are when you're having them. That is like, if you look at any gold standard, ESL, I'm sorry, social emotional learning, that's like the basics. Like I remember before I learned how to meditate, sometimes I was so disconnected from my feelings that it could take me a week to get mad at you. Like it would take me that long to feel that I was angry about something. And so that's kind of the base. So I'm really excited because people are starting to build in that category. And we need more things like Moxie, and not just robots, but it's like, there's so many different types of people that there need to be, a plethora of options for people to come in at different places. And I really believe in meeting people where they're at. So I'm also really excited about, things that sit on top of games. Because out of 7.5-ish billion people, more than half of them play games of some kind. And by the way, many people have a very limited view of what games are. Games are a combination of play, narrative, community, and exploration. Like that's really what a game is. And some have different dopamine loops on them. But like a girlfriend of mine built a game that's called Jane Austen's World. And that's really what, or it's not called that, but that's essentially what it is. And so it's, where, a Call of Duty is super fast, it's super slow. People go to dances, they flirt with each other. All of this is digital. Half the people in there are men, which is like, turns out a lot of dudes like Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice and stuff like that. The weapon is gossip. So you can alt G and like gossip someone. And so it's slow. There's so many different types of games. There's Civilization, and it's just like, it basically is like, the digital world and the physical world have really come together. So I'm excited about people who are doing that. And I'm also really excited about, on the far sci-fi side is things that really enhance our, our mental and emotional capacity. So, I follow a lot of the neurotech stuff and, things that are that people are working on to enhance. The other thing I'm excited about is I think actually our homes and cities are great canvases for supporting our well-being. Imagine a city built from the ground up to be your partner. Instead of big brother, it's little sister, and this, Nabil, really requires, to your point, we have to get the data privacy, ethics, and sovereignty right. We all need agents that run interference for us and designate data as either private, public, or for sale, because people should have the right to sell their data if they want to. Like one of the issues I think you see with many of the data advocates is that they sort of treat people like Tamagotchis in that they know what's right for them. And I'm sort of an advocate that I want people to have options. People should have choice. And there's a lot that has to happen in order to ensure, privacy, ethics, and sovereignty. But on the other side of that, if someone chooses to be compensated for their data stream, they should be able to do that.
But that's the thing. I mean, the thing that's so kind of, revolutionary is that thinking that, all of these companies, all these social media companies and all these technology companies, their biggest asset, the gold rush, the oil well, the fountain of revenue that they've come to, it doesn't really belong to them. It belongs to us. And, selling that data is what makes them all their money, and we're just kind of giving it away. We're not involved in that process at all.
Well, it's crowdsourced, right? So I think we came up with this hashtag, Phil, that's data rush.
Right.
Nichol, I think you bring a lot of great points. So part of the challenge that we have in our industry, or generally in technology, is the fact that it's the blind leading the blind where decisions are being made, and it's how can some of these leaders put more in their pocket. The lack of awareness, knowledge in the general populace is a part of the issue. People don't know, they don't understand, they don't read the short print, they agree to all the terms and conditions that are being put forth by their legal counsels, which ends up in us giving away all of our rights. Them getting all the data. I totally agree with you that it should be totally a choice of people, but it needs to be addressed foundationally at the lobbyist level, at the government level.
Which means you need government level people that actually understand technology. I mean, it's like it's like the dinosaurs leading the charge. They have no idea. They're so far behind in terms of understanding this, it makes the rest of us look like, I'm going to try to think of someone really smart. I can only think of Nichol right now. So it makes all of us look like
Well, I would say there's four things that are needed. One, there absolutely is some sort of regulatory response. But, that can also go, in an ineffective way. Just sort of look at GDPR. But absolutely we need some sort of regulatory layer, that's a part of it. The other part is, we actually need some advances. We need data unions. We need, like I said, the ability to designate something as public, private, or for sale. It turns out, when you look at, without getting too granular, even so if you look at the hospitals of the world, if they wanted to make, if your eye doctor and your foot doctor wanted to have a single record for you, the data interoperability is we're nowhere near data interoperability. But in order to do data interoperability, you actually have to have trust and standards. And in order to have trust and standards, you have to have the data interoperability. So there's a bunch of pieces in there that are very granular. So we need some technical advances. Some people are working on things that, where it's sort of you can use AI to match the data up, because so many of the data sets are not interoperable. And there is another side to that. I think you're going to need some regulation on that.
Electronic health record, we have been talking about it for the last decade, right?
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that the databases are the same, the data points are the same, but nobody in the government space or the regulatory space can define what those boundaries are. So technology exists. It's not being implemented because of the lobbyists, because there's
also a lot of things if, for example, you take EEG data, people, and that's brain, for your audience, that's brain signal data and bio data.
Stop pretending like it's not for us. It's for us. The audience also.
But the minute differences in how people take that data on the same types of machines can make the data not interoperable. So even when they're trying, they can get it wrong. So you're right. We've had the medical records for a long time, but it's on the implementation side, one of the dirty secrets is that it's even if a lot of these groups want it to interoperate, they can't. They can't even when they're owned by the same hospital groups and some things like that. So I guess the bottom line is one, we need regulation. Two, we need advances. There's some tools that we need technologically. Third, we need culture. Culture is a part of it. And what I mean by that is I think people are getting really savvy, a lot more savvy than they used to be. One of my colleagues at Stanford did a study on the 2016 election, and it turns out that 80 to 90% of the fake news was forwarded by people over 70. And so really it was grandma, grandma and grandpa, really did a lot of the fake news spreading. And teenagers check headlines 5 times, on average 5 times before they believe them. Now, one could say, it's terrible that you can't trust the headlines. But on the other side, if you step back and look at it from another angle, those are incredibly media savvy young people. They're really media savvy. And the moment you give them the ability to monetize their data stream, they're going to get mercenary about it, I think. The moment the tools are sort of in their hands, and so they're actually in many ways savvier than we think about it. So it's and you have to look at, I spent a lot of my time, looking at lots of seemingly unrelated, points. Another example would be think about you can find entire streams or entire, topics of, where young people are looking at whether or not something that they're looking at is real or fake. It's one of the reasons why you've seen this move towards authenticity, which is now being replaced by intimacy. And so they have these they're starting to get these really well-developed filters on what's real and what isn't, but they don't have any tools. They're basically having to figure it out on themselves. They don't have anything that's an advocate for them that they control, that they have power over, and that is working on their behalf, which is the opposite of the attention economy networks. So I really believe it's like what's going on today, the way that RJR behaved, the way that the cigarette companies behaved, we were all kids when that was happening, but it's the exact same thing.
I hope we can have this conversation again, because it's brilliant. And I don't know that we haven't scratched the surface of, how technology has impacted, the younger generation who is now kind of beholden to it.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we'll all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. I'm confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.com.